Hello and welcome to today's Student Experience podcast. Joining me is Ben Hallett, co-founder of the student support platform Vygo. Ben is engineer turned education technology entrepreneur, and he helps build student capability and connection through better access to peer mentoring, tutoring and staff support. And of course, they're also working on the Mentor Academy. Welcome, Ben.
Hi, Tanya. Great to be here.
So can you share us some of your journey and how you came to make that change of direction from engineering, which seems quite a different direction, into that student
Mhm.
support in higher education?
Yeah, sure. Well, you actually missed my first career, which was failed musician before engineering. But when I knew the band wasn't working, I enrolled at University of Queensland in civil and environmental engineering, and that was my passion. I loved numbers. I loved spreadsheets. I was ready to build a new world, and I, I was actually introduced to my now co-founder, Joel DiTrapani, on my first day at UQ. And he quickly became my, what we call each other co-everythings now. Beyond meeting him on my first day, he became, he was the best man at my wedding. We code every assignment we did together. We became engineers at the same company together, and then we finally decided to come out and do Vygo together. And so when we were starting going back when we started at UQ, it was a really interesting experience for us. We had obviously developed some great horizontal connections with our peers, and one of our connections was our really good friend Tony, and he was in our friend group. We were all studying civil environmental engineering together, and Tony was by far the smartest guy out of our group. And it was quite interesting in the fact that in that first semester with Tony was actually hit with some family issues. Like many first year students, just completely out of nowhere, suddenly Tony had to look after family off campus. And in that first semester, it became quite noticeable that Tony fell behind the group. And at that time, the university probably had peer tutors and peer mentors and probably a counselor and an advisor, all people that Tony should have had access to and should have been interacting with, that would have really helped him at that time. But because of the lack of technology, really, it was quite hard to get those services out to Tony. And as I said, in that first semester, he fell behind his friend group, his horizontal peer group, and he failed a class, which meant that in the following semester he had to come back, repeat that class. All of his friend group, we had progressed, but he was now alone and studying and trying to do so off campus a lot, and missing out on all of the services that were available on campus. And in that second semester, he dropped out completely. And for Joel and I, that was a big trigger point for what is now Vygo. It really started our thinking of how do we prevent students like Tony falling through the cracks? Why didn't Tony have access to all of the support services that the university had for him at that time? And so we had that trigger in our head, but it was actually then a second story that came into for the start of Vygo, which was at the end of our degree. And it was Joel and I, we were participants in UQ's refugee mentoring program. And that mentoring program, it actually did so much more for us than it did for the mentees. These students, it had an academic tinge to it, but these students, they were smarter than Joel and I. It was supposed to be about math, but they could do their times tables way higher than Joel and I could. And what these students really needed was just someone to sit there with them and to be their friend, to give them confidence. And often we would just say nothing. But because there was that help there next to them, they were so much more prepared to step out into the dark, to go a little bit further. And that program really changed us. It gave us leadership skills. It made us feel much more connected to the university, but also connected to international students. And it made us just feel really good about ourselves. And so by the time we actually finished university and went out into industry, we really had these two core convictions. one was from Tony, and that was that every single student deserves a champion.
Mm.
And the other one was from this program where it was every student deserves the opportunity to champion somebody else. And so with those two convictions, we then, with all of Joel and my energy, we said, we're really passionate about this. And it seems like there's a big gap in the university space to connect students to all the support that they need, but also involve students in the support process. And when we looked into that, it really seemed that we could take a lot of what was being proven at that point in the sharing economy, the Ubers, the Airbnbs. I know that sometimes those can have negative connotations, but we dropped all the bad parts and kept all the good parts. And what was being done in those spaces for technology to solve the idea of trust at scale. And if we could take technology and we could solve trust at scale, perhaps at university, we could actually involve much more of the student population at scale to be able to support each other. And maybe we could create an ecosystem where everybody has the opportunity to help everybody in lots of different ways. And the very first idea and what we call, minimum viable product, I'm sure you've had very many MVPs as well, Tanya.
Yep.
The first MVP of Vygo was actually, it was called uqengtutor.com. Horrible name. And Joel and I, we were running it in nights and weekends. And essentially it was a website that had two buttons: be a tutor, get a tutor. And those two buttons linked to Joel's mobile phone. I don't know how I convinced Joel that I had to go to his phone, not my phone.
That was a good plan.
And so we created that website, very simple, cost us $10 to put up. And we bought a burner phone, for lack of a better word for that. And then we went up and put up a bunch of 10-cent posters at UQ. I don't think we had the permission of properties and facilities. I think we made some enemies there, but we definitely had the support of UQ's entrepreneurial training and their school there that they have, Idea Hub and iLab. They definitely said, go for your life. We will turn a blind eye to property and facilities. And what we found was overnight, the platform flooded with both sides of that marketplace. We had so many students who were, hey, I would love to be able to help people. I've never considered tutoring before because it's so hard. I have to market myself. I have to, I can only tutor things that very specific things like Civil 3140 or Math 2150. Those are things I know. I'm not the best mathematician. I'm the best Math 1051 mathematician. So what we found was suddenly all these students were actually really willing to put their hand up and help each other. And then the other part was that we had so many students who really wanted that class specific help. And when we connected those students, they were having a really good experience. Everybody was reporting back, no, that was awesome, really good. And so at that point we decided there's something in this. Let's actually invest in creating the technology. And we're in a bar and we're pitching what was happening to our engineering friends. And one of our engineering friends said, this sounds a lot like Vygotsky and Vygotsky's zonal proximity of development and theories about peer learning. And we're like, what? And he explained a bit more about it. And his wife was actually doing her Masters of Education. So she was studying about it. So suddenly he knew heaps about it. And we're like, Vygo. And we looked it up and it's like, man, they're saying a lot about what we're saying, that sometimes the best person, if this is you and you want to grow to become the professional, you want to grow to become the industry or expert or an investor, sometimes the best person to help you get there isn't always them or the lecturer. Sometimes it's that peer who's one step ahead, who actually, they understand what you're trying to learn in that moment, but they also, they think like you, they look like you, they talk like you, and they can help translate that learning in maybe a more meaningful and quick way. And so, we said, if we shortened that down, Vygotsky to Vygo, that sounds like Uber. All right, that's it. So we took on Vygo as the name. We now own the trademark for Vygo, but that's only recent. And yeah, we brought on our third co-founder, Stephen, who built all the technology, because Joel and I were the wrong type of engineers. And we put the mobile platform out. At that time, again, it was only really for students. Universities weren't involved. And when we put the mobile technology out, the floodgates opened again. And so we expanded it out from UQ engineering to be UQ everything. And we were covering 500 unique classes at UQ within a couple of weeks. And it was, that opened up a number of opportunities. One, we had some investor attention, and we got into a really good accelerator. So we got into UQ's accelerator, iLab, which was amazing, and UQ gave us a bit of startup funding. And then when we graduated that, we also did Steve Baxter from Shark Tank, his accelerator. And the third thing that happened at the end of that was we started to get tapped on the shoulder by deputy vice chancellors from around Australia, saying, "Hey, I think you're solving some of the problems that we're trying to solve, and could you come and do that for us?" And that got us thinking, maybe we should actually flip the company to become a partner of universities. That way we don't have to charge students anything, which hits on our mantra. And also it gives us access to so many more students, and we can go at a much bigger scale with a university partner. And so we spent about a year updating the platform to actually make it fit with some of the university's needs. And we did a lot of interviews with universities and administrators and program managers. And it was in 2019 that we went out and we got our first paying university, and that was our home university, UQ. It wasn't the engineering faculty, but the engineering faculty have since come back, and now we are working together, which is great. But it was actually UQ's international pathway program, and they were the first people to really back us and believe in us as a university. And that was just over 18 months ago. Fast forward to now, we are now coming up to 1 in 3 Australian universities are using us in some way or another. And we also now work with one university in the UK as well, Coventry University, #1 for student experience in the UK. And of most recently, the Queensland government, when with COVID, it was there was a really big opportunity with all the technology we had built to help student support services play out online. There's a really big opportunity to step up and support the Queensland government and everything that it wanted to do for international students in Queensland. And yeah, it's been a really good ride so far, really fun. We've learned a lot. The learning curve has been completely vertical the whole way. And yeah, we're really excited to keep going, particularly with everything that's happening in COVID and in the post-COVID world. We think there's a lot of value we can add.
Yeah, and coming back
that
to
was a long story.
That was a long. That's okay. One of the things that you mentioned in terms of Vygotsky was that one step, and I know I use that a lot with mentors. It's the person who's recently had your experience, so they still remember what it's like, but they know how to get to the next level. That's key. So with that in mind and reflecting on your own experience, what sort of value, what is the value to the student experience of having peer mentoring and peer tutoring as opposed to having a staff member or a third party do it? Because obviously there's lots of experts out there. That's a model that's often used. So how does this affect the student experience differently?
Yeah, definitely. So the first thing I'd say is that it lowers the barrier to entry quite significantly. And you'll see this at a typical university, group tutorial where the lecturer is there, and then there will be a number of, appointed student tutors who are there as well. And you'll often see the lecturer is, freely available and standing there, and there's a big lineup for the peer tutors. And when you dive into that, you often discover that students are quite scared of talking to the faculty a lot of students, and I know I was included when I was at university, you don't really understand the implications of going to a staff member and saying, I don't get it. I'm struggling. I'm behind. You know, particularly when you build an affinity for a lecturer, you can feel a bit guilty going up and saying that I don't get what you're talking about. And actually I missed that last lecture and I haven't caught up yet, but I really need help. So when you bring it down to a peer level, it reduces that barrier of entry quite significantly. And then I would also say that when you make it less of an appointment based, when you have a staff member, they're a paid employee, they're going to work between set hours. So you're going to have more of an appointment set up to get to them. They're probably going to be booked out for a while. So it's going to take quite a bit of time to get access to that service. And then when you get access to that service, it's pretty confronting. It's going to be face to face in a room with a much more senior adult. Whereas when you get into the peer model, suddenly that opens up so much more of the population to give support. It opens up the population of people who can support you, probably on your own time scale as well. So, when we open up peer support, 50% of the activity that happens on Vygo happens after hours. And that's not just from the students requesting help, but it's from the students giving help as well. Students are happy to give support in the after hours on weekends and things like that. So the second thing is that it opens up the availability of support a lot. And then finally, it becomes much less about the initial question getting asked and much more about your experience of the university. And when you're going to a peer tutor, you're not just getting a question answered, you're making a friend, you're making a connection. And in the university setting, you're having your university's experience. You're having the UQ experience. And what we often find is that particularly on the mentor side, we get feedback of mentors saying, I now feel like I have friends on campus. And I remember one mentor for a program we had at QUT, she said, now when I go to university, after helping students for this last semester, now when I go to university, there's 5 or so people that I'll just see walking around campus that I get to wave to and say hi, and that student, she's now having a QUT experience, much more through and through. And those relationships, the peer relationships, they are able to extend a whole lot longer. So we see lots of the peer relationships going much beyond the initial help session or the mandatory, 6-week period where you're supposed to connect with your person. They extend for years and years and years. And I think that's been happening for a long time in universities, but to have that longer relationship, everybody's just adding each other on Facebook and playing it out there. But what we've been able to do is, with the technology, actually keep housing that relationship wherever it goes. And so the university actually gets to see the outcomes of what's, those relationships.
So I know, like, when we're talking about a lot of face-to-face stuff. I would imagine because Vygo is a technology app, that you're still creating those connections, even for students who are studying off campus and they're not actually physically in the room. They would still be building those connections.
Yeah, and that's really been sort of the key part of Vygo during the COVID-19 restrictions so far. Particularly with students now stuck across the world. So with the platform, we've done a lot, and we've invested a lot of work and time and money into making the platform feel as close and as familiar as possible to Instagram and Facebook and things like that. We're not a social platform. We have an internal rule to never compete with Facebook. You'll never win that fight. But the seamlessness of its chat functionality and of jumping into a video, those types of things, we invested a lot into that. And particularly in the back end of last year, which I'm so glad we did, because it became our core use case during COVID-19. And it's been quite surprising. Introducing those tools into the support programs has been surprising for the institutions that we partner with, where they've had existing programs before, because what we typically see is students, they don't want to just jump straight to a face-to-face session. When that was the only option prior, typically, they actually really love jumping in and just starting a chat conversation first. And, you know, the chat will typically start in the evening, and it'll be something along the lines of like, you know, hey, Sam, I really liked your profile. That was really funny. Ha ha ha. I also like surfing. You know, I'm really falling behind in Civil 3140, particularly with this topic. Is that something that you could help with? And then, you know, the mentor, they, you know, a lot of the time they get back to them, you know, quite quickly, you know, because it comes up as an alert on their phone, just like all their other alerts. But, you know, a lot of the time it just gets picked up the next day. So it can be asynchronous. And what we'll see is a chat conversation go back and forth. And sometimes the questions get answered via the chat. And that's great. You know, maybe it was just a question about how to use the printers in the library, and, you know, quick, you're off and going. But what we'll typically see is the relationship will start as a chat. And then once they're familiar with each other, then it will build into a face-to-face relationship, be that, you know, video, online video, or in person. And I think that's been quite surprising for our partners, because they didn't really expect that to happen. But I think it makes sense. I think modern students, and really every modern people, we've become a whole lot more shy of physical interactions. And it's so much more comfortable and convenient to start with text chat and, you know, an emoji and a GIF. And so, yeah, it's the online tools have been really good, not just for COVID, but just for the general increase in students taking up support.
Okay, so I know from my own experience, and also from other coordinators that I've spoken to in that peer mentoring space, gaining real traction can be a bit hit and miss, particularly with programs that aren't compulsory. So can you tell us a bit about the work you're doing in the Mentor Academy, what changes you're expecting to have with mentoring programs and the student experience in general?
Yeah, totally agree. And you know, one thing I'd say to all program managers who have been disheartened by initial results, and I've definitely been one of them, you know, is to not give up. You know, not to use your first weeks or months as an example of where things are going to be, because sometimes it just takes time for programs to click, and you've just got to keep iterating on the program, and, you know, the marketing, the program, all the ingredients of it. And, you know, what we've seen is when you keep iterating, you find the things that click, then those programs become almost like a flywheel, and they just grow and grow and grow, and they just keep getting better. So, but I think one of the things that we can do is what you mentioned about the Mentor Academy. So the Mentor Academy, for everyone who wouldn't know what that is it's an initiative which Vygo is spearheading, but we are just a partner in it. We are providing the financial side of things, and we are being a voice in it. But we've partnered with academics and program managers and staff from 10 different universities across Australia, the UK, and the US. And what this is it's a mission to create the world's best online, freely available student mentoring training. It's a lot of words in that. Mentor Academy has more of a ring to it. But essentially, the idea for this came out of you know, we're a tech platform, and we didn't have our own mentor training. You know, we facilitate a university's internal programs, which they typically already have. They already have training and things like that they would put their mentors through before they hit the platform. But midway through last year, we had a number of partners who actually wanted to launch their first mentoring program in a particular space. And we were an enabler of, they previously couldn't, but launch this program, but now with the platform they could, for whatever reason. And as part of that, we really quickly learned that they didn't have a training yet. They wanted to launch in a few weeks. And so we quickly slapped together a training. And I would say our team, we made a training that was probably, with our university partners, that was probably on par with what you would typically get at a university. But for us, we didn't want to just, be on par. We wanted to be like how we think about our platform. We wanted to be 10x better than what was previously existing. And when we started to think about, well, how can we create the 10x mentor training, we actually said, well, we should actually make it much bigger than us. We should include the voices of lots of different universities, particularly ones who weren't using Vygo, and we should get all these people involved. Then one, academics are going to be able to help create a training much better than if we were just to create a training. Two, we'll get lots of different lenses on it, from Indigenous lenses to mature age lenses to online lenses, all of that. And then we said, well, it would actually be quite worth it for us to put a bunch of money behind it and make this really good. And so that it is, it will be freely available to all of our partners, but also available to everybody else. So we decided to put 100 grand into it. And we set a target. We said that we wanted to train 100,000 student future leaders with the mentor training. And we were going to approach the project in 3 stages. Stage 1, which is about to kick off, is with the academic council that we've formed, is to spend 6 months iterating and creating the first training. And at the end of that 6 months, which is scheduled for January, is the first release of that training. And it'll be, again, freely available for anybody to use, whether you use Vygo or not. It's just going to be online. And stage 2 will then be with that first release to get the first 1,000 mentors through. And with all the data of that, then get back with another academic council and improve it based off all the data and maybe expand it to be bigger than its initial use case. And then the third stage after will be that final iteration to get with the from 1,000 to 10,000 and mentors. And then after we do that, do another release. And that'll be the final part of the stage. And then we'll put it on track for 100,000. So
awesome.
The value that we think this will bring is, for the universities that have their own mentor training, the idea is that this can be a digital component that either can replace their mentoring, or it can work alongside of it. The typical mentor training from a institution is probably, it's like a 2-day intensive on campus. It requires all the students to be there, and it's just like a lecture and food break in between and things like that, which definitely has value. We don't dispute that at all, but we think in some circumstances, like in COVID, that's not going to be possible. And secondly, we think a bunch of the sort of core information can actually be ticked off before a student gets to that on-campus or more detailed training, which will make it much more cost-effective for the university, but then a much easier segue for the student and break up the learning. So we see, with a really good, really fun and interactive training, we see universities being able to attract more student mentors, and then also being able to shorten their more cost-intensive training as well.
And it also would have, freely available to anyone, means that it has a potential to benefit people in countries and communities that wouldn't otherwise have access to those sort of skills.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's really been really cool that we saw so many people put their hand up to be involved quite quickly. You don't often, you don't often see lots of universities working together. It can be quite competitive, and whose IP is this, and is it our IP, and this is, but it was really refreshing. I mean, 10 different institutions straight up wanted to be involved. So I thought that was quite really refreshing and really exciting.
Awesome. And well, that's all the questions I have for you, Ben. Is there anything else that you'd like to share that we haven't covered yet?
I think just an encouragement to program managers right now trying to support their students through COVID, and for all of the executives who are supporting these programs. I just think right now during COVID and in post-COVID and the mixed modal infrequent shutdown world, student connection is just going to be more important than ever. And so I really encourage everybody to keep their chin up, to keep going, and to keep iterating with the tech tools that they have, and not to give up, and keep listening to their students and improving. And yeah, I'm sure we'll all in this together. We'll get through it together.
Yeah, and I think the important thing is that we are all able to adapt and pivot and actually understand that regardless of how our students are accessing their education, we still need to be able to provide them with support. And I think, that's really key, particularly at the moment. So.
Yeah, awesome. and a lot of time it's our differentiator, and it's them getting the the UQ experience, the QUT experience. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you again so much for today. It's been a pleasure having you. And
thanks for having me.
I look forward to seeing how it all rolls out, particularly with the Mentor Academy coming next year.
Thanks, Tanya.